don't need a quorum. I just need a couple of you guys. I'm good. Okay, so we're talking about value and of discretion. We're talking about discretion or truth, discretion or equality. So the courts have kind of flip-flopped on this whole idea of should you let the judge make the decision, because sometimes the judges have biases. This is what was going on in the South, of course, this whole idea that, well, if you're black, you're guilty. If you're white, you're probably not guilty because white people are good and black people are bad. Oh, I remember I was asking you about black and black males. White people hate black males as compared to everybody else. What's wrong with black males? Did you guys ever figure anything out? What's wrong with black males? It has to do with sex. Isn't that sad? And it has to do with all these myths that surrounded slavery. So let's assume that I'm a slave owner in the South, and I've got a plantation, and I've got all these slaves in my plantation, and I'm married to this wonderful woman, and I reproduce maybe once every 3 or 4 years. We have a baby. Some of the babies survive, some of the babies don't. But I've got slaves living in the slave quarters, and by golly, these guys are just popping out babies left and right. And they're all surviving, which is good for me because I can sell them. Yeah. This is great. I can sell them. So strangely enough, this myth about the hypersexual black male became very real in the South. The Southerners, during the Civil War, the Southerners just kicked the crap out of the people in the North, and the reason they did is because they already had an army. The South already had an army, and the reason they had an army was because they were afraid that the black people, that the slaves were going to rise up, and there were more slaves than there were white people, so they maintained an army to control the slaves. They were afraid the slaves were going to rebel. That was why they had militias. There were militias all over the South. In the North, not so much. Why would they need a militia? If you're on the East Coast, there aren't any more Indians over there, so why in the world would you need a militia? If you're in the Midwest, there's no more Indians over there, so why in the world would you need a militia? So when the war started, the South already had an army, and the North didn't. So the North had to create an army, and of course, they had to train the army, and the army lost Union Army lost all these battles in the very beginning. But one of the reasons that they had an army in the South was to control the slaves. And it wasn't the female slaves that they were worried about, it was the male slaves that they were worried about. These large, strapping individuals that they sold on the slave trade block. They needed to control all these people. So this myth continues to this day. White males are afraid of black males, and it has to do with all of this odd things that were going on back in the 1800s until the Civil War. As stupid as that sounds. Now, why in the world does this still exist? Why in the world should we be afraid of people because of what happened 100 years ago? Why shouldn't we be afraid of American Indians? We never fought against the black people, not really, but we did fight against American Indians, right? I mean, it took them forever to figure out where Geronimo was. They were fighting Sitting Bull up north for a long period of time, right? So why aren't they afraid of American Indians? There was actually a hostility between the government and American Indians. Who knows? But as far as black men are concerned, they've always maintained these myths, these negative myths about black males. And a lot of it has to do with sex. It has to do with their ability to reproduce. As confusing and stupid as all that sounds. And there has been a racial bias, and the racial bias usually is between a white judge or a white police department and African Americans. When I was living in Mississippi, I was living in Mississippi in the 1990s. I was living in Mississippi. If you went downtown, if you talked to a black individual from Mississippi, a black male, the guy was having a hard time finding a job because nobody would hire him. Now they hired black females, but they wouldn't hire black males. And this was in the South. So what do you do for a living if you're a black male? Well, they won't give you a job, so what do? How do you survive? You live with your mother, or you do something illegal. You don't really have much of a choice because nobody's going to give you a job. And they have an excuse. The excuse is, well, if I hire you, then nobody will come into my store. If I hire you, then nobody will come into my lumber yard because I have African Americans working for me, which is not the term that they use, but we'll pretend that that's pretty close to the term that they use. Does all that make sense? No, it has never made any sense. The biggest problem is that a lot of these white people have never been around black people, so they don't really understand them. They believe the myths. And it's potentially the same way with American Indians. They believe the myths. They assume that you're all alcoholics or all diabetics. Well, they don't really care about the diabetic part. It's the alcoholic part that they think about. As horrible and strange as that is, the myths are stronger than reality. So as I told you the story before, when I was in college, I was not a member of a fraternity. All the fraternities were segregated, so that they had no black people in the fraternities. So all the African Americans going to our college were in the dormitories. And so those are the guys that I was around. I was around white people, of course. There were white people in the dormitories. But there were also African Americans. So I had a lot of friends who were African Americans. And I met these individuals. I talked to these individuals. We interacted a great deal. We socialized together. And because of that, I understood that the myths were completely erroneous. Totally and completely erroneous. As interesting as that is. But you had to make contact. You had to be in close proximity to these individuals to understand, or to even question your own myths. And there were white people in the dormitories who were around these guys who still tried to maintain those myths. But it's very difficult when the evidence is right in front of your face. As confusing as all of that is. Okay, does all that make sense? So these people, unfortunately, they maintain myths. One of the problems that they had I can't remember that little town just north of St. Louis, where they shot the kid and they had riots for like a month, a couple months. Is that Henderson? Anyway, they looked at the police chief, they looked at the emails of the police department. What they discovered was that these guys were sending derogatory emails. They had a picture of President Obama. Obama was president at the time, and they called him a monkey. And they had a picture, they superimposed a monkey face on President Obama. I mean, this is the President of the United States, and they're calling him a monkey. So there were, they maintain, some people maintain these really idiotic myths of white supremacy and that blacks should be seen and not heard or whatever. Anyway, and of course that's what was going on in Charlottesville. They had this white supremacy rally, and they were saying and doing negative things as far as African Americans were concerned, and a lot of people didn't like it. There were a lot of white people there that were protesting against the white supremacists, and there were clashes, and eventually one person drove a car into a group of protesters and Antifa, is that anti-fascist. Yeah, Antifa. That's what they refer to them as. I know. It's really, I never read this stuff I don't read the the conspiracy theorist that the Antifa has to do with the anti-fascist movement in the United States, as if all the white supremacists are fascists, as confusing as that is. Okay, so the value of discretion to counteract sentencing disparity, many states implemented determinate sentencing. So if you, it's a drug offense, you go 5 to 10. If it's assault with a deadly weapon, it's 15 to 25. You know, the judge can't go, well, this is your first offense and you're not a bad person, you've never had any crimes before, you pick up this gun and you threaten somebody with it, so I'm not going to send you to jail for 15 years. I'm going to send you to jail for, I'm going to give you time served plus 10 years of probation. Yeah. But in some states they can't do that, because in some states they have determinate sentencing. So you have to send them to jail for a select amount of time. The offense determines the sentence and the judges have little discretion. Judges didn't like they don't like determinate sentencing. As they said, it made them feel like robots. So this is really kind of a problem in those select states. But if you're a judge in one of those states, you really don't have to do a whole hell of a lot, because it doesn't have anything to do with you. The sentencing has already been determined. Wife abuser, there was damage done, the individual had to go to the hospital, the guy's going to go to jail for 5 years and there's no questions. Despite the fact that she may have attacked him with a knife. And he was defending himself and then he got a little carried away afterwards and sent her to the hospital. Okay. I know, discriminate sentencing. But of course, if he did it, then he goes to jail for 5 years. Recent decisions have moved away from determinate sentencing and have enabled judges to have more discretion in their decision making as far as the sentencing is concerned. Because truth is often elusive, the most important priority of a trial may be justice. So justice has to be served. But what is the truth? Well, truth is really kind of difficult. Truth has to do with interpretation. And usually you have, anytime you have a confrontation between two individuals, you have two people interpreting situations completely differently. So what is the truth? And of course this has come out because over the last 2 years since Trump became president, there has been an investigation as to what in the world is going on with his administration. So he says one thing, and it seems to be that we're finding out other things. So what is the truth? Is the truth interpreted? And it turns out that he can say one thing, and it seems like Robert Mueller is saying something totally different. He keeps saying there is no collusion. Was there any collusion with the Russians? The Russians certainly had something to do with our last election. So yeah, obviously it had something to do with our last election. We found them on Facebook. We found them trolling on the internet. We found all of these cases. What else did we discover? We've got Maria Butina, but let's not even think about her and the NRA. We have money coming into the NRA from Russia? Really? $31 million worth of advertising against Hillary Clinton, and some of that money came from the Russians. Oh, wait a minute, the NRA, that's an American organization, isn't it? Okay. Is it legal for a foreign government to come into the United States and to give money to a campaign? Is that legal? It is?
Well, we do have. No, it's not.
Oh. So a foreign national, somebody from Canada, can't decide that they want
So-and-so to be a leader.
so-and-so to be the president of the United States, and they can't put any money into that campaign. That's illegal. You can't do it. You have to reject that money. If money comes from a foreign source, you can't accept it. Okay, so this is the argument. So we're looking for truth, but the truth is interpreted. So we've got one side saying one thing, we've got the other side saying something totally different. And we're looking for justice. But will we ever find truth? That's the question. Well, truth is interpreted. Because lawyers believe the purpose of a hearing or a trial is to win disputes, they present arguments supporting their client's perspective, and they back up their arguments with the best available evidence, and evidence, just like the truth, is interpreted. So you can interpret it any way you want. We just had a trial, Paul Manafort's trial. He was being tried for tax evasion and for fraud. The tax evasion, actually, he was convicted of all the counts of tax evasion because it was fairly obvious. He made $60 million, it's right there, he has it in his checking account. However, he didn't pay taxes on $60 million, and he didn't declare the $60 million, so obviously that's tax fraud. He cheated on his taxes. Okay, so now he's going to go to jail for an extended length of time, probably the rest of his life. He's in his 70s. I mean, how can he live for 35 more years? I guess that's the question. Will he ever get out of jail, or will he die in jail is the question. Or will he be pardoned by the president? Possibility. When both sides believe that they have the chance to be heard, participants are more likely to feel that they have been treated fairly by the system, and the system is more likely to be considered effective. Anytime a trial starts in the United States, the defendant is not guilty until they are proven guilty. So they start out on an even keel. The evidence against them is interpreted. It can be interpreted in two different ways. And that's exactly what they were trying to do with the evidence against Paul Manafort. A lot of the evidence against Paul Manafort came from his associate, Robert Gates, who flipped. He committed the same crimes that Paul Manafort did, except not nearly as much money. And he dropped a dime on Paul Manafort. In other words, they arrested him, and he decided that he would testify for the state. Of course, the state in this case is Virginia, because it wasn't federal court. It was state court. Anyway, okay, so we've got Robert Gates. Richard Gates, Robert Gates. Robert? You got Robert? Anyway, we had Mr. Gates testifying against Paul Manafort. The defense tried to claim that Gates was lying. They claimed that he was lying. That you can't trust this individual. He's an individual who, in order to get to not have to go to prison for an extended length of time, he's a liar, and he would be willing to lie in order to stay out of prison. That's the picture they tried to paint. Now all of this is interpreted. Remember, everything is interpreted. So the jury had to decide whether Robert Gates was truthful or not, whether he was believable or not. And they did. They convinced every member of the jury they were willing to convict the guy of 18 counts of tax fraud and other things. But there was one individual that didn't believe it, and they couldn't change her mind. They couldn't change her mind, and so they only convicted him of 8 counts instead of 18 counts. 18 counts, he would have gone to prison for an extended length of time. But he has to go to trial again in federal court, and this has to do with the election. He was Donald Trump's campaign manager from April until August of 2016. So let's see what happens. I know this is going to be interesting. It's just fascinating stuff. What's true and what's not true. When you hold a trial, of course, everything goes the same way, and this is known as procedural justice. The fact that everything is happening in a sequence. The prosecuting attorney will speak first. The defense attorney will be able to question the prosecuting attorney's witnesses. Then they present the defense. And then the prosecutor gets to go back and he gets to refute what the defense has said. So the prosecutor gets to speak twice. Defense only has to speak once. And this is known as procedural justice. Because everyone is heard. Everyone is given the same hearing. People feel that procedural justice is a good way of doing things. Proceed to address this. Truth versus conflict resolution. Okay, so let's say that somebody, we won't call him Trump, but let's call him something else. Let's call him Bump. He builds a building. He builds a building. And when he builds that building, he hires a construction crew, and he pays the construction crew in a certain way. They make a deal as to how long it's going to take. They make a deal as to how much money it's going to cost, how much money Bump is going to pay to the construction group. And the construction group decides to bring in outside individuals to put in the plumbing or whatever. Okay, so Bump has to pay the construction group, and then the construction group pays their outside contractors. That's the way it works. Okay, so let's say that so Bump not only owes the construction company, but he also owes the outside contractors. That's the way it works. Okay, but he didn't hire the outside contractors. So when it comes time to pay those outside contractors, he doesn't pay them. He says, I didn't hire them, so I don't have to pay them. The money has to come from the construction company. The construction company says, no, that's not going to work. You have to pay them, because we brought them in to do this work. And you wanted it done in a certain amount of time, and they did it in a certain amount of time. If we had to do it, it would have taken forever. And Bump says, that's not my problem. I'm not going to pay those guys. So they go to court. They go to court. So one side sues the other, and then the other countersues, and now we've got this conflict going on. Who has to pay that outside contractor? Right? The money comes from this big pile of money that Bump has paid, right? Okay. But he's decided he doesn't want to pay those outside contractors because they're charging too much money. I don't know. There's a lot of different reasons to do it. He doesn't like the color of the marble that they put in his bathrooms or something. Okay. It's not exactly the color he would have picked. But of course, they're outside contractors, so they didn't negotiate with him. They had to negotiate with the construction company. Okay, so now we've got a lawsuit taking place. So and they sue him because he didn't pay them the money, and he didn't pay them the money. So is he a criminal for not paying for something that he got? He would be, except they plea bargain instead. They plea bargain, and he loses because he has to pay them, and so he pays them the money, or he doesn't pay them the money, and they sue him, and of course it stays in court for an extended length of time, and then they go out of business because they don't have any money to maintain themselves. So is he a criminal? I mean, he didn't pay for something that he got. In essence, he stole that stuff. Is he a criminal? Yeah, but he plea bargained down, so he didn't lose the case. He plea bargained, so he didn't lose the case. And this is how plea bargaining works. Well, this is how it works in big business.
Okay.
I know.
I would say it's much easier when it's on an individual base.
Yeah, I mean, if two people are equal and we both go to court and we decide to plea bargain, no problem. One of us is going to win and the other's going to lose, or probably we're both going to lose.
Now that makes me question now, is that the reason why Trump went and he made his platform the whole illegal immigration? So that way later on he gets
Whose
to do
fault
that
is
again.
immigration? Who does he tell us that? Whose fault is it? It's the other guys.
The other
Yeah,
guys.
it's always the Democrats'
It's never
fault.
our fault.
Well, no, he never takes credit for anything. But then again, you can do that if you plea bargain. You'll never lose a case. You never have to lose a case. And even if you do lose a case, you're not a criminal. You didn't do anything wrong because you plea bargained. You plea bargained it down. And usually in the plea bargain, it says that I did nothing wrong. That's part of what he's signing, is the fact that he never did anything wrong. Plea bargaining focuses on resolving conflicts rather than determining truth. The truth is, he didn't pay for the marble countertops in his bathrooms. He didn't pay for it. The money came out of the contractor's money. And they're suing him to pay. Between 90 and 95% of defendants plea bargain, they accept the offer of the prosecutor, and they plead guilty to the lesser charge. This happens all the time. In criminal cases, it happens in civil cases. A lot of plea bargaining is taking place. So lawyers rarely go to court. Usually they'll plea bargain. And when they plea bargain, everybody's happy. And the reason they're happy is because it doesn't cost the state any money, it doesn't cost anybody any money. Well, it costs the guys that are paying the lawyers. But and they've got a decision in a relatively short period of time. It takes months to take a case before, 6 or 8 months. The Parkland shooter was last year, and he has just gone to court to plea. They've just taken him to court. And that was a year ago. Those guys were shot a year ago. And it's just taking place now. So it takes a while to get these cases into court. But if you plea bargain, we can get this thing taken care of right now. That's the way it works. Are we talking about justice here? Not always. Sometimes people are really upset. There's a new movie out. It's got Jennifer Garner in it. And her family is murdered, and she gets mad at the prosecuting attorney for plea bargaining from homicide, from murder to, I don't know, assault with a deadly weapon or something. So the guy that murders her daughter and her husband is released from prison after 6 months, and now he's on probation or something. So she's mad at the whole justice system. This is a new movie that has just come out. So she decides, I don't know, she's going to Catwoman
Take
people.
care of it
She's going to take care of that. She becomes the shadow.
Like it says in the Bible.
Exactly. She's going to chop everybody into pieces or something. But this is the way plea bargaining works. Sometimes there's no way that you can get a conviction. Despite the fact you know that this guy committed the crime, you can't charge them with the whole crime. If you do, they're going to go to court and you're going to lose. So what they'll do is they'll plea bargain down to something lesser. At least they will be punished for something. And that's usually the way the prosecutor functions. Rape is a really, really tough one. It's a really, really tough jury trial for a lot of different reasons. But usually it's just between two people. And it's a he said, she said situation. He's going to claim that she was a consenting participant, and she's going to say, no, you forced me to do what happened. And of course, we know that sex took place because we've got a rape kit, we've got pictures. So, but the probability of that case being won by the prosecutor isn't very high, and that's one of the reasons why you see all the horrible statistics on rapes, the rape statistics. There are a lot of rapes in the United States, but they're very rarely convicted because it's usually between two people. You've got no eyewitness. What kind of DNA do you have? Well, it doesn't really matter. Of course, you're going to be swapping DNA, but the question is, who's telling the truth? So normally what they'll do is they'll plea bargain, unfortunately. And the guy goes back on the street to potentially do it again. The state benefits by avoiding the expense and the trouble of trial and the possibility of an acquittal, and by obtaining the testimony of the accused person against others involved in the crime. The defendant, of course, benefits by receiving some kind of reduction in the penalty imposed, and of course that's what's going on with Michael Cohen. He has been given immunity for his testimony. He has already pled guilty to 8 counts of tax fraud and election fraud. But now he's flipped. He's going to drop a dime potentially on the president, but we'll see what happens. It hasn't happened yet. Donald Trump has never lost a case. He's never lost a case.
That's insane.
And he's taken to court a lot. Trump University was a sham. It was a ripoff. And he was sued by a number of people that had gone to Trump University. And it looked like he was going to go to trial. But as it turned out, he didn't go to trial. He plea bargained. And now he's paid them, I don't know, $36 million or something. So, I know. So they paid $2,600 or whatever they paid. It was like $2,600 a weekend for this Trump University thing. And so they're going to get back, 20 cents on the dollar of the money that they spent.
People with money suck.
But he didn't lose. Now the thing about this is, of course, back in the old days, back when there was only one telephone company in the United States, Bell Telephone. Bell Telephone could charge you anything that they wanted. And what they would do, they would not set up, service military bases. So in order for you to get telephone around a military base, a local company had to set up a telephone exchange in that area. So around all these military bases, Bell Telephone did not service you. Now here's the deal. Bell Telephone had owned all of the long distance lines. They owned them all. So they could charge you anything that they wanted. So if you made it a long distance telephone call from a military base, it went through the local exchange and then it had to go to Bell Telephone. And so Bell Telephone was socking really high charges to all the military people. This is back in the this is during Vietnam War. We had all these Army bases, all these Air Force bases around the United States, and Bell Telephone wasn't servicing any of them. You always had to sign up with another telephone service. The base itself had to sign up with another service. They had Watts lines for official business, but if you wanted to call off the base, it cost you an arm and a leg to call off the base. If you lived in base housing, then you had this local telephone company, and you had to pay a certain charge, a relatively large amount of money per minute, like $2.30 or $2.50 a minute, just to call off base. So here we have all of these really lonely military suckers, and it's costing them an arm and a leg just to make a telephone call off base. So they started using the Watts line, which is free, but it's like fraud. So, it was really a bad deal. My wife left me, and she went back to Indiana. So she would call me collect sometimes when her boyfriend was messing with her or something. So she would call me, and we had all these relatively long telephone conversations. Back then, you had to keep an eye on how much time you had been on the phone, because this is costing $2 a minute, that kind of crazy stuff. One month I had a $1,200 telephone bill. $1,200 telephone bill. Now the thing about Bell Telephone is they were a monopoly, so they could garnish you your wages. I was making like $500 a month, and here I had a $1,200 telephone bill. Okay, so there were individuals that sued AT&T.
The things you did for love.
I know.
The things you did for love.
Or lust, whatever it is. So there were individuals that sued Bell Telephone. It wasn't AT&T back then. It was Bell Telephone. They sued them. And they went to court. And they were obviously guilty. They really were doing this. It was very obvious. And they had minutes from the Bell Telephone meetings saying, we can make a lot more money if we do this, and we can charge any amount of money that we want. We've got this isolated base in the middle of Lubbock, Texas. We can really sock those guys at Reese Air Force Base, and we can make a lot more money. And it was right there. They were talking about it. They were admitting that they were trying to defraud the government. And it went to court. They got a friendly judge, and he said, well, we need more information. And so this thing drug on for years. Literally years. This was when I was, I'd only been in the service for like 2 years when this took place, and I was one of the plaintiffs. Not that I had to testify or anything, I was just some guy that signed up. So this went on for years. By the time that they didn't even settle the case, well, they plea bargained the case. And none of the soldiers got any money. It all went to the lawyers. All the money went to the lawyers, I know. So Bell Telephone just drug this thing out for like a decade. It was nuts. By that time, they had broken up into AT&T and they had Southern Bell. And they'd broken up into these different organizations. So they didn't really owe anybody any money because they didn't exist anymore. Bell Telephone didn't exist anymore. But they not only plea bargained, but they drug it out forever. And by the time they settled the case, I was out of the service. And to this day, I will not use AT&T. I don't care why. I don't care if that's the only way I get my iPhone to work. I will not use AT&T because they ripped us off. And they were socking it to the military person. And it was really an ugly, ugly situation. Talk about patriotism. Anyway, okay, so everybody benefits. Plea bargaining is good for everybody, or it can be good for everybody. And that's, of course, the way that Donald Trump wins all of his cases. He either drags them out forever, or he plea bargains them down, and it says that he was not guilty. The civil justice system uses a procedure similar to the plea bargaining to resolve about 90% of the conflicts between a plaintiff and a defendant. In settlement negotiation, a plaintiff agrees to accept what a defendant is willing to offer to end their legal disagreement, and this is done through conflict resolution. All depends on how pissed off both parties are. If it just has to do with money, usually plaintiffs will be upset because they're paying the lawyer so much money. So they'll settle because actually the longer it drags out, the more money they have to pay to the damn lawyer. And that doesn't seem fair. So a lot of times if it just has to do with money, they will settle almost immediately just to get the lawyer off their docket, because what the lawyer will do is they'll charge them by the hour. And sometimes they'll charge whatever they charge, but sometimes they charge $150 an hour. All they have to do, if they were sitting in their office thinking about your case, they charge you for an hour, even if they only thought about your case for 5 minutes, and they wrote something down. They have to charge you for an hour. They never charge you for 5 minutes. They charge you for an hour. Oh, I was having a conversation with my friend in the restroom. So I had to charge you for an hour's worth of thinking about your case. Legal procedures and institutions that facilitate therapeutic ends, for example, drug courts that focus on treating the underlying problem of addiction rather than simply punishing the offender, are part of an approach termed therapeutic jurisprudence. And of course, this is what we've tried to do with people suffering from an addiction. Somebody was arrested for smoking marijuana or for possession. Do we want to really throw this person in jail? And the answer is no. Canada hasn't been arresting people for drug possession for an extended length of time. Canada has legalized marijuana. It was never legalized before, but it wasn't criminalized before. So you could smoke marijuana, you could possess marijuana in Canada. If they caught you, they'd take your pot away from you, but they wouldn't arrest you. So the Canadians have been imbibing in marijuana for an extended length of time, since back in the 60s. They decriminalized marijuana. But in the United States, of course, it was criminalized. We were trying to control the drug trade in the United States. Sometimes the only conviction you could get would be for possession of marijuana. So they were throwing people in jail for a year and a half, whatever they were doing, they were throwing them in jail. If they were somebody that was marketing marijuana, or they were marketing crystal meth, of course, they threw them in jail for a much longer period of time. Now the question is, so you've got a pound of marijuana, you're carrying around, or 3 pounds or whatever, are you a user or are you a pusher?
That's the argument there.
That's the argument, sure. How much marijuana you have to have in order to market marijuana. And they were actually arresting people for having residue, having paraphernalia. They were arresting them for that. And they were going to prison, especially if they were a known drug user or pusher. They were arresting.
Currently, right now, for Navajo Nation, marijuana laws are kind of iffy right now because Navajo Nation approved the growing of hemp seeds.
Oh.
Because I know land grant, they got a huge grant, like $1 million grant over the summer, and I know they got approved for growing hemp seeds as well. So because of that, the laws for marijuana kind of went iffy. But 1.4 is the legal carrying limit.
1.4 ounces.
Yes, on the reservation, on the Navajo Nation, because that's deemed, well, like what you said, that's the
Sure.
argument there. Personal, or are you going to be a
Right.
pusher? So.
Right.
But then it's up to the discretion of the arresting
Of the judge,
officers.
of course.
Yeah.
Discretion again.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah.
So they can say, you're just a
So
user.
it depends on the officer, whether
Exactly.
the officer, and a lot of them are very strong to their personal preferences of the kind of people they like to arrest and not to arrest. Like
Ah.
right now, a lot of the officers, they let a lot of veterans go, but they have a soft spot for veterans.
Sure.
But for everybody else, it's like, I don't care who you are, I don't care what you do, I just don't freaking like you. Because you're contributing to this or contributing to that.
Well, you can understand how some officers will arrest anybody that's black,
Mm-hmm.
or anybody that's Hispanic,
Mm-hmm.
or anybody that's not white.
Yeah, the
Okay.
same kind of thing.
Yeah,
Deal
exactly.
on the rest too.
I don't like your look. You're not pretty.
You're
I'm-
not told to
No,
so
I
you're arrested.
I don't like the way you did your hair today. You're going to jail. Okay.
There's just something about you today, you're going in.
Not all divorces are contentious. Many divorcing couples choose to work together to determine child custody programs and division of family assets. This represents a form of conflict resolution, of course. My daughter just went through this. It was a mess. It cost us $20,000 to resolve her, and she has never been married to this guy. It wasn't even a divorce. It was a child custody case, and it still cost us $20,000. Not that she paid the $20,000. This is one of the reasons why I'm eating beans and drinking water. Okay, as sad as that is, so the argument was, and this was the sad part. She had a job in Iowa. And the courts didn't want her to leave Florida, or the baby daddy didn't want her to leave Florida. They had never been married. They had lived together, obviously. She got impregnated by the individual, but they had lived together for not an extended length of time, but for a while, for about 1.5 years, they'd lived together. And she became pregnant, and he moved out of the house almost immediately after she became pregnant. So they actually never lived together while she was pregnant, or when she had the baby. But he helped take care of the baby. So he thought he had some custody rights. And that was the question. How much custody rights did he have? And the problem was, well, I'm a college professor. I have that much money. My wife was a retired Air Force colonel. She had that much money, but his family were millionaires. I know. So who do they listen to? The person that has always taken care of the child, or do they listen to the cash? Do they listen to the money? So the question was, who's going to hire the best lawyer? And as it turned out, we hired the best lawyer. But yeah, I know. She got to go up to. She got to leave Florida. He kept delaying everything until the beginning of the school year. She didn't have a job down in Florida, and here she needed to go to Iowa just to start her job. So she had to sneak out of the state. This is so bad. She had to sneak out of the state. She said that she was going up to Iowa to do something else, and she went up to start working. And my wife took care of the baby, so my wife was taking care of Reese, and my wife was supposed to be in Florida because she wasn't supposed to leave. Anyway, everything turned out okay. My daughter's in Florida, The baby daddy gets, he got 6 weeks during summer break. He gets him this weekend. I know, Labor Day. He'll get him during Thanksgiving. He gets him for half of Christmas. He gets him for spring break. Yeah, I know. That seems like too much, doesn't it? Well, here's the problem. We have to fly him down there, or we have to drive him down there. It takes 2 days to get there.
I was gonna say,
It's
that's
expensive.
a lot.
I know. So if you see me and I'm eating my beans, you know, and drinking my water, you understand that I have to save money to help my daughter and my grandson. And the problem is, this is the bad part. Whenever he goes down to see his dad, he comes back and he's changed. His personality's changed. He's wetting his pants. Because the guy throws him in the pool. I mean, he lets him stay in the pool for an extended length of time. And he told the kid, well, you know, if you're in the pool, go ahead and pee. So he doesn't know how to regulate it. I know, it's so, you want to just punch the guy right in the nose. Except he's like 6'4". So. Here, stand right here, okay? And I'll punch you. Whereas my daughter's only 4'11". She's this tall and he's 6'4". We won't go into the rest of it. Anyway. What are we going to do now? Law relies on precedents. Psychology relies on scientific method. Laws are looking for precedents. They're looking for absolutes. The law has to be determinate. It has to say one thing. It can't say two things. It has to be definite. Psychology, on the other hand, I mean, you guys have read all this psychology research, all the scientific research. We never say anything is definite. We never say anything is absolute, ever. We can't, because something may change. Even in physics, gravity, is gravity always the same? And the answer is no. You can take an airplane up in the air, and if you flip it over. Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's not actually the same everywhere, because it all depends on a lot of different things. But there are places.
Flushes this way up here, flushes this way down there.
Exactly. Australia, everything goes the other direction. As confusing as all that is. So is gravity always the same? No. If I live in one place, we're up at 7,500 feet, so my weight has changed from 7,500 feet to 263 feet where I live in Iowa because of the air density. Exactly. When I played softball in Germany, the air was really thick because it was Germany and it was at sea level, and and so it was hard to hit that ball over the fence because the air was so thick. I know. But when I lived in Lubbock, Texas, I was cranking home runs like every third bat. I was just jacking the ball over the fence. Why? Because the air was so much thicker. It was at, I don't know, Lubbock's at 2,800 feet, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Germany, the atmosphere is just so different. So everything changes. I mean, there are no absolutes in physics. There are no absolutes in science. Psychology is generally committed to the idea that there is an objective world of experience that can be understood by adherence to the rules of science, systematic testing of hypotheses by observation, and experimental methodology. And that's the way that we do things. And that if you're in Sue's class or you're in Sarah's class, you understand that there are no absolutes, and you can't really say that this is always going to happen. Nothing is ever definite. So everything is kind of, that happened this way this time, but next time it may not be the same thing. Legal experts rely on precedents, rulings in previous cases, as well as the Constitution and statutes for guidance. So they look to the past. There are individuals in the United States that want us to use the Constitution, and they want us to read it specifically. And those should be the laws of the United States. Whatever it says in the Constitution should be the laws of the United States. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Isn't it? That was 1789 when they wrote the Constitution, and things have changed since then. For one thing, we have cars. We also have telephones. We also have black people are free now, and they weren't free back in 1789. So how in the world can we read the Constitution as if it's an absolute document if things have changed so much since then? Can we do that? Well, they want us to. The principle of stare decisis, let the decision stand, reflecting the importance of abiding by previous decisions, is important in this process. And we're having an argument about stare decisis right now. As we speak, they're trying to decide whether Brett Kavanaugh should be a member of the Supreme Court. We know that he's conservative, and we have read what he has written about Roe versus Wade. We know what he thinks about special counsels, because he wrote it in other decisions. So the question is, if he is elected to the Supreme Court, is he going to allow the Roe versus Wade, which was passed in 1972, or which was decided in 1972, allowing women to get an abortion if they want one, is he going to allow that to stand? There are a lot of conservatives in the United States that want Roe versus Wade overturned. They want a new ruling. They want abortion outlawed in the United States. Before 1972, there was no abortion in the United States. There was no legal abortion in the United States. There was no legal abortion that the doctor wasn't part of. Okay. Doctors could go in and they could do what they call a D&C, and if you happen to be pregnant and you lost your pregnancy, but they didn't do that because it was against the law. And if it was discovered that they did that so that you would have an abortion, they would be arrested and thrown in jail for a number of years. Okay, so that's the question that we're looking at right now. Stare decisis. Does he believe that Roe versus Wade is a precedent that we have to pass? And right now we're looking at all of the stuff that he has written. We're looking at some of the things that he has said since then, and he has told select individuals that he believes that Roe versus Wade is stare decisis. In other words, he would not overturn Roe versus Wade. Or would he? Is he a liar? And if he is, who cares?
You never know until he gets there.
You never know until he gets there.
Until we have to deal with it.
Exactly. So if you have a decision that's 5 versus 4, it still passes, and nobody, despite the fact you've got 4 people that didn't agree with it, it's still law. So this should be interesting to watch. One more thing that we have to keep our eyes on. Science versus law. Law deals with absolutes, of course, and psychology deals with probabilities. Lawyers prefer absolute statements, and if you've ever watched a case, if you ever watched a real case, lawyers are always trying to get psychologists to say that this is the way it is. They want them to talk about absolutes. If it's a good psychologist, they won't. They will not say that this guy is definitely insane. I've never seen anybody more insane in my life. If there's anybody that has schizophrenia, it's this guy right here. They will not say that. They will say, this individual appeared to me to have symptoms that were very similar to schizophrenia. But that's what they'll say. They have to say
That's
that.
the proper language.
That's the way they're supposed to do it. But the lawyer doesn't want that, because they want the jury to hear the guy's nuts. That's what they want to hear. But of course, the psychologist can't say that, not if they are ethical anyway. Psychologists prefer to think in terms of probabilities, where delusional thinking could indicate a psychiatric disorder. The reality is, when somebody picks up a gun and shoots somebody, are they in their right mind? Is this a sane thing for anybody to do, to shoot somebody? Well, if you're a soldier, it's very sane.
It's legal.
And it is legal, but is it legal for somebody to shoot somebody? And now we're finding, of course, even in cases with policemen, it still has to go to court, and they still have to make a decision as to whether it's murder or whether it's a lawful shooting.
Like self-defense.
I'm sorry?
Like self-defense.
Yeah, self-defense. Sure, and usually that's what they try to prove, that this person proved a danger, When they were running away, they were creating such a vacuum that it would have sucked me along and I would have died.
That's a big shot.
Yeah. It's really hard to prove self-defense when somebody's moving in the other direction. But it's
Zoom
done.
pass by me like a semi.
I've seen it in the movies, you know, you're running along
colorful
chasing somebody, and then a truck just comes and smacks him. So I was afraid for my life, so I decided just to shoot him. I aimed for his legs and hit him in the head.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, you must have been running.
Yeah, my gun went off while I was running. What a lucky shot. Law supports contrasting views of reality. Psychology seeks one refined view of reality. Of course, you've got a defense team and you've got a prosecuting team, and they represent two different ways of looking at things. But psychology doesn't do that. We don't do that. We think of reality as one thing. And that's what we're trying to do with the Las Vegas shooter. What was his reality? His reality is very important because that has something to do with why he massed all of those weapons and why he accumulated all that ammunition and why he went up to the 36th floor and started popping away at 10,000 people at a concert. There has to be a reality, his reality. So we're always looking at one thing, one reality. If he were still alive and he were going to court, his defense attorney would try to create one reality and the prosecution would try to create another reality. That's what happened with Manafort. They always do that. My reality is different from your reality. If you listen to Rudy Giuliani, I don't know if you're listening to any of this stuff that's going on right now, but Rudy Giuliani always gives us a different way of looking at things. He says, oh, this looks like you're saying this is collusion, but truth isn't truth. And in reality, he's right, because truth is interpreted. So your truth may not be my truth. And that's what he actually meant. So it's interesting. We're getting two different pictures of the same thing. And that's the way the law works. Psychology doesn't work that way. Whatever that guy's reality was when he started popping away at that crowd, that's the one that we want to know about. What was the reality of the kid in Jacksonville? 24-year-old father is a NASA engineer. Brilliant man. So potentially this kid's pretty damn smart too. He's only 24 years old. Why did he shoot those two kids? Well, they were kids actually. They were in their 20s. But why did he do that? What we need to do is create the reality that he was recognized. And that's what psychology does. In court, of course, it would be completely different. We would be dealing with two different realities. And actually, we may be dealing with 12 different realities because we're looking at each juror and they get to make a decision. So their reality may be totally different. Judges and jurors must decide which of two conceptions of the truth is more acceptable in light of conflicting facts. And that's what was going on with Paul Manafort. They had 11 people that decided that Paul Manafort was guilty on 18 different counts. And they had one person that said, yeah, I will agree that he's guilty on 8 counts, but not on these 10 counts. And so the jury was hung on 10 different counts. And that's why it took 3 days for them to make a decision. The defense offered nothing. There was no defense. The only defense they had was that Gates was lying. That was their only defense, as odd as that may seem.
That's all we need.
I know. So we had 12 different realities. 11 people agreed on the reality, and one person didn't agree on that reality. And so there's always at least 12 different realities, maybe 13, counting the judge, and then we've also got the prosecutor and the defense attorney. So we're dealing with a lot of conflicting ideas. And the question is, what do you believe? If we had a Trump supporter in here, and I'm not a Trump supporter, the two of us would not agree on what reality is. They would talk about how good the economy is, and I'd talk about immigration, and I'd talk about all of the EPA being emasculated, and that would be my reality. His reality would be something totally different. He's ignoring all of that. During the Obama administration, my friend who just died of a heart attack last year, my friend, I would tell him, look how well the economy is doing. And he would say, I don't care about the economy, I hate Barack Obama. That's what he would say. I wish he would die, which is actually a threat against the president, but I didn't ever. I don't know if he could have carried out an attack on the president, so I certainly didn't turn him in for not liking Barack Obama.
Have you ever been part of a jury duty?
I've never been to jury duty for a couple different reasons. One is that my education is really high, so they don't like me to be on a jury. And the other reason is I move around so much. They can't pin me down. I just keep bouncing from one place to the other. There you go. I mean, if I were called on jury duty, I'd vote in Iowa, so they would call me to jury duty in Iowa. And here I am 2 days away in Arizona. So I couldn't be called in Arizona. And I wouldn't be called here anyway, would I? Because I live on the Indian reservation. So you're not going to call a Belagana for jury duty on the reservation. And how far would I have to go for jury duty?
Does the reservation have a jury duty?
I don't think so.
No.
No, you
just
guys resolve
state.
conflicts in different ways.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it depends on which side of the reservation you live. If you live on Central that way, you'd go to Phoenix for jury duty. If you live this way in Northern, I think you'd go to Albuquerque.
So where would I go to jury duty as a Belagana? I'd have to go off the reservation.
Yeah,
Okay.
because you can't arrest you on the reservation, so
No.
it wouldn't be fair that you are on
Sure.
jury duty.
I'd
So
be on the jury.
that's kind of your rights to that, I guess.
I live in Apache County, so they would have to call me to jury duty from Apache County.
Mhm.
Is there any non-reservation sections of Apache County? No? It's all reservation?
There's St. John's.
St. John's,
St.
that way.
John's.
Okay.
Down south.
Is that the county seat?
Yeah.
St. John's is the county seat.
And then there's a
Yeah.
judge in Chinle from the Apache County. Justice of the
So the
Yeah,
problem,
something
yeah.
like that.
So the probability of me being on jury duty is fairly remote.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Psychological research can be conducted to assist the courts and law enforcement, and we try as best we can. But of course, our idea of things is a little bit different from the law's argument. I don't know if you've ever talked to a lawyer. They have no clue about psychology. They think that we're hypnotists. I don't know what they think. But they're a little, and we don't understand them either. Research, my sister was a lawyer. She was really kind of interesting. And I'll tell you what, my sister and I got into some rip-roaring arguments. Her claiming that this is the truth and me claiming that something else is the truth. Really kind of fascinating. She was a feminist and I went to an all-male college. Not sure what that means, but we used to argue all the time. Research on visual perception can help us understand the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. Eyewitness testimony is not always accurate. Just because you see something doesn't mean that that's what happened. Your brain has to interpret it. Sometimes your brain has to make sense of what happened. So your brain changes it to make more logical sense. You may see one thing, but your brain may tell you that you actually saw something totally different. And we see this all the time. Research on memory can help people understand repression and long-term forgetting of a traumatic event. The reality is, if you've been through a traumatic event, and I've been through lots of traumatic events, I don't remember jack from most of that stuff. I don't remember any of it. The only part that I remember is that I was scared. That's all I remember. I don't remember specifics. I don't remember pain. I don't remember a lot of different things. If it was funny, I might remember it, like when my wife stabbed me. The funny part was later. It wasn't like the knife fell out of my chest.
Just the emotion part you remember.
I wasn't emotional at all. Remember, she was arguing with me, so she was pissed. And I wasn't anything. I mean, she was having an argument and I wasn't even part of it. She was just yelling at me about money. And of course, I could only make as much money as I could, and you know, I don't know what she wanted me to do, so I just went to sleep. Next thing I know, I've got a knife in my chest. How dare you go to sleep? When I'm arguing, when I'm telling you something.
What'd you do? Did you go to the hospital?
I couldn't. Haven't I explained this to you? This is what happened. I was in the military. My wife stabbed me in the chest. In the military, I'm responsible for my spouse. And since I'm responsible for my spouse, she stabs me, I get in trouble. So if I'd gone to the emergency room, and I worked in the emergency room, if I'd gone to the emergency room, they would have had to have turned it in as domestic violence, and I would be the one that got in trouble. So in order for me not to get in trouble, and this is me thinking, of course, not her, she's just screaming and bouncing all over the place. In order for me to stay out of trouble, I didn't go to the emergency room. I fixed it myself.
Oh, Bruce.
I didn't have a choice. What was I going to do? So I'm going to lose a strike because my wife stabs me. That doesn't.
Reservation rules,
Then
right?
he almost got stabbed again.
I'm sorry?
Then he almost got stabbed again by her.
Well, she stabbed me once in the arm earlier in the day, and she stabbed me once in the leg. And we were arguing about money. She had spent all my money.
And she was mad at you.
She was mad at me because I only got paid once a month. That was my fault. And the military only paid back then. They only paid you once a month. And she was mad at me because I didn't make more money. And I had been in the service for like 3 years, and I had 4 stripes. I was an E5. Nobody makes E5 in less than 4 years, but I did. And so I was making more money than I should have been making. But she was mad because it wasn't more money. And she was also mad because we only got paid once a month. And she grew up her father was a factory worker. Factory workers got paid every Friday. So every Friday was not only payday, but every Friday and Saturday and Sunday was party day. I mean, that's when you went to just blew all your cash. So here we were, you know, I'm only getting paid at the beginning of the month. At that point, we were getting paid at the beginning of the month. At the beginning of the month. I got paid. She spent all my money. We had no money for food. We had no money to pay any of our bills. She'd spent all of this money.
So who got the divorce? Like, did you?
I got the divorce. She left. And when she left the state. So I was stationed in Lubbock, Texas. She took off for Illinois. So she was in Illinois with her boyfriend.
So you self-treated your stab wounds?
Yeah, I treated it myself. I know. It bounced off my rib. I was lucky. And
Oh my God.
well, I mean, otherwise it would have gone into my heart. I mean, she was right over my heart. She stabbed me, and it stuck. It was stuck in my chest. And I woke up, and I got this knife sticking out of my chest. I stood up, and the knife fell out. It fell out because it didn't go in very far. It bounced off the rib. Luckily, it was a steak knife. Sharon knows this story. She already knows this story. The whole steak knife bouncing off the ribs. Anyway, okay, so I survived. Obviously, I survived. I mean, what am I going to do? Go in and get busted? They would have had to have done something to me if I'd gone in. So they would have kicked her off base. They kicked her off base. They would have kicked me off base. Yeah. So it would have cost 3 times as much money for housing, you know. And she just spent. I got nothing. I got no money. I can't even buy gasoline. She spent everything.
And she had enough gas to.
What's she
To take
buying?
off? I'm sorry?
What's she buying? Like drugs?
You know Tupperware parties? It wasn't Tupperware.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you've heard of Tupperware parties. Well, they've got all kinds of, you know,
Different
makeup
items.
parties and stuff. This was Artex. This was a paint in a tube, and it had a ball at the bottom of it, so it was like writing with a ballpoint pen,
Oh,
except it was
okay.
paint.
I'm reading.
Okay, so she bought like $550 worth of Artex. She had an Artex party. And she couldn't get anybody to buy anything, so she bought enough Artex so that she would get a present. I mean, they were, if you spent $500 worth of stuff. Are you getting the picture?
I'm watching the commercials the whole day.
So she got this like $20 gift certificate from Artex.
She was like, "What's the flower?"
Yeah, except they didn't have that back then. I know. So she spent all my money on Artex, and we had no money for anything else. The idea was she was supposed to get a percentage of what was sold. So we were actually going to get more.
Kind of like how Mary
Kinda.
Kay and Avon works.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But it's not money that they give you. They give you a certificate for a select amount of
Shoot, it was
stuff.
either paycheck and those are the two.
And I don't know. I don't know what's going on in there. Whatever it was had to do with mine, so. Anyway, so she had all this art things.
Did she take that with her?
She did. She took it with her. She left. Thank God. And stupid me, you know, somebody else would have got pissed off and just smashed all the tubes of paint, but I'm going, no, this stuff is worth a lot of money. My kids are going to starve to death because of this paint, so I can't possibly destroy it. That would be
Bruce, you
counterproductive.
got good temperament. I would have probably lost mine a long ago.
I didn't lose my temper. Well, something else, but I didn't lose my temper. Research of social attitudes and behavior can clarify why people obey or don't obey the law, as well as who is likely to become a terrorist. We can tell who is more likely to become a terrorist. Terrorists are very emotional people. They get mad at something, and so they decide that they want to hurt somebody. And this just builds up over time, and eventually they strike out. And that may be what happened with Katz. Katz is the guy that shot up Jacksonville, the video tournament. That may be what happened to him. Things just built up over time.
Yeah.
And it seemed like, if you looked at what was going on with Katz, it looked like he was upset because he wasn't seated higher. And this happened tournament after tournament after tournament. He developed this anger towards the people that seed, so he decided that he was going to revenge himself on these individuals, and he went in and he shot people that were of higher seeding than he was. The two people that he killed were of higher seed. He was seeded 7th, and he shot people that were higher seeded than he was. He only shot contestants. He didn't shoot people in the audience. That's one of the things that they pointed out, that he was only targeting individuals that he was competing against. I don't know if does that make sense?
That's really quick for him to get to that level, though. Unless he was
We don't know how
thinking about
long.
it and preparing for it if he already had his weapons there.
Oh, yeah, well, he obviously had
Yeah.
weapons.
So he obviously knew what he was going to do.
This guy was really, really smart.
Mhm.
Okay. So
So he thought about it.
he thought about it for a long
Long
time.
time.
Yeah. And he decided he wanted to die. He committed suicide. Shot himself. It wasn't the cops that shot him. And he didn't shoot himself at the tournament. He went next door to a restaurant and shot himself in the restaurant.
Kind of just to separate himself.
Exactly. I know. So there is a logic to all of this stuff. There is a rationale to all this stuff. There is a reality that we need to find out as far as Katz is concerned. And his reality was this Madden football world. That was his reality. He lived in a fantasy world. And now, of course, he revenged himself on those people that were thought of as more than he was, despite the fact that he was very good at what he did, as strange as that may seem. Okay. Ethics of the basic scientist. Basic scientists, like all psychologists, must adhere to standards of ethical conduct. They cannot fabricate or forge data. They cannot plagiarize. They cannot present a skewed selection of data to hide observations that do not fit their conclusions. So if I'm a researcher and I do research and I don't find what I want to find, if I am ethical, I will not fabricate my data, I will not plagiarize, I will not steal words from another individual, and I will not skew my results. Now the problem with that is that if I'm doing research and Stephanie's doing research and I'm looking at it from one perspective and she's looking at it from another perspective, and I get negative results, I'm not going to publish because it makes me look like I'm incorrect. And that makes me look not as intelligent as I want to look.
Not credible.
There you go.
Not incredible.
So poor Stephanie's sitting over here in another portion of the United States, and she never reads my results because she doesn't know about it. So maybe she's going to start thinking the way that I'm thinking, and I know that that's wrong, but I'm not going to publish. I won't publish because it makes me look too bad.
But it's needed.
It is needed. Negative results, we need to start publishing negative results. We need to start publishing failures. Because unless you know how somebody failed,
Then you know how to go on.
exactly. So this is necessary, but it's very rare to see a researcher that will actually publish their negative results. We must treat human subjects in an ethical manner. We must reveal any conflict of interest, like we're being paid by one company, and lo and behold, we find out that company has done something really, really good. Okay, that's a conflict of interest. All right. Okay. Why don't we stop right here? We'll pick this up next time. What is today? Wednesday, I guess Monday. No, Wednesday, a week from today, because we have Labor Day.